Hello, today is Friday, June 5th, and welcome to episode 604 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Senior Fellow Jessica Jones, and I'm joined today by two of our most favorite senior fellows, Matt Hayden and Algene Saldry. Thank you for joining us this Friday, guys. Okay, we're doing a little bit of a redo. Over the past year, Fault Lines and the crew have talked a lot about tariffs. They've been kind of out of the news, but it's back, guys. Earlier this week, we heard from the Trump administration about a new wave of tariffs. The U.S. Trade Representative announced plans to impose tariffs on goods from 60 countries, arguing that these nations have failed to adequately combat forced labor in their global supply chains. The proposed tariffs range from 10 to 12.5%, and they affect major trading partners, including China, the European Union, Japan, India, Canada, Mexico, the UK, a whole bunch of others. If you guys maybe remember, the Supreme Court earlier this year struck down many of the administration's tariffs related to Liberation Day tariffs, as we like to call it, from last year, a ruling that the White House had exceeded its authority by relying on emergency powers. But we're back to tariffs. We've got a new legal justification for them, this forced labor violations. So I want to talk a little bit about what's going on, our economic strategy. Matt, I want to turn first to you. Okay, what did the administration announce this week? How does this differ from tariffs that we have been discussing previously?
So previously, the president had used his authority as the international representative to negotiate on behalf of foreign affairs. And in combining diplomatic and economic issues to leverage tariffs, the Supreme Court found that you didn't follow the processes that were already on the books. So we have an institution through several codes on how to levy tariffs, especially when it comes to things like forced labor and unfair trade practices. So someone comes and pumps and dumps a bunch of wicker furniture in the United States, we have a vehicle to defend against that type of activity. And so they went back and started to establish the proper procedural metrics to get those findings in place. And here we are, after the strike down of the diplomatic authority for foreign affairs, we're now looking at 301 and several other type authorities to make sure that it's appropriately documented and in place. This administration is going to see trade as its primary issue. It's going to see that as an opportunity to do all-in-one diplomacy with trade included previously, but now that they're isolated to levying tariffs in a way that follows this specific procedure, it's going to be on an independent island. So to the extent that someone may consider one conversation about trade very positive and then another conversation about anything else diplomatically very negative, it's going to be two separate conversations. So we're going to see tariffs that are pretty much paper-backed and ready to go with a lot of process behind them now to extend in a broad area. I don't think we'll have the same level of market fluctuation because this time there is a lot of forecasting that's gone into place. This has been something that's been expected. You said, it's been 60 days. This is something that a lot of folks saw coming. If you're an importer exporter, you knew about this for about a month. So there's not a huge knee jerk reaction to these.
So isn't it like last year where we got an announcement one day of a tariff and then a step back the next day? And so you weren't really sure. And the market, both consumers and the markets weren't sure whether the tariffs were going to last or not. So right now, if they're announced, like we're going to see the impact. I think it's interesting though, the split, your discussion of, diplomatic tools, economic tools. It's hard though for the Trump administration, even if they're going, this route, to see them not using these tools kind of holistically, right?
There's a timeliness to it. So
yeah.
you can't go in and have a conference call or go in and shake hands with somebody and then come out with this type of a product. This is like the lead time on it makes it more independent.
Okay. Algene, what do you make of this announcement this week?
I just, I've worked on human rights issues and forced labor, human trafficking issues in Congress for a long time, right? As somebody who has worked on this issue, and many of us at NSI have, I think it's really offensive that they should use forced labor as an enforcement mechanism for these tariffs. It really is shocking. And, I don't think anyone is supportive, of course, of forced labor, but to be hitting Canada, the UK, the EU, Japan, and Taiwan, for example, at the same rate as serial forced labor abuses is quite alarming. You'd be lumping in China at a 12.5% tariff rate right next to Nata like South Korea, right? So, and who's paying, right? Not Beijing, not Brussels. American importers pay Section 301 duties, and they pass the costs of those duties to American families. The administration knows this. That's why they're already carving out exemptions. Months before the midterms, they're quietly sort of admitting that their own policy is inflationary. Meanwhile, prices on everyday staples are going through the roof. For example, the cost of ground beef is up 25% since this administration started. Coffee is up 40%. Price of gas is up 33%. Groceries, rent, healthcare, the power bill, right? All at a new all-time high as of last month. Right. And so to use modern day slavery as an excuse to raise costs on American consumers is quite shocking and bold, I would say. This is an administration that won't call history's largest and longest running forced labor enterprise, the transatlantic slave trade, a crime against humanity. An administration that is simultaneously restoring Confederate monuments and trying to dismantle slavery exhibits, an administration that is actively, and I mean like as we speak right now, deporting people with pending T visa applications. These are people who are legally seeking asylum for sex and labor human trafficking right now in the United States. They're deporting. Now, they say this administration wants the world to believe that they're sort of global champion against modern day slavery. And I think that's pretty outrageous. I understand that this is just another creative avenue in which to, get at these tariffs. But, aside from the moral confusion, there's some real damage to the current forced labor enforcement regime under Section 307, which includes sanctions against China for the forced enslavement of Uyghurs. And I think by blanketing our democratic allies with the same tariffs as authoritarian regimes, this administration is really just handing Beijing another talking point that, American forced labor enforcement is arbitrary, opportunistic, and indistinguishable from old-fashioned protectionism, right? And so, for people who really care and monitor human rights and forced labor around the world, this is really quite offensive. I think the bottom line is if you actually want to fight modern day slavery, you sort of do it with targeted sanctions, coordination with our allies, not taxing our allies and the American people, and a little bit of moral clarity. So, you don't really get at this issue by taxing over 99% of American imports and alienating every democratic partner we have. So it's really shocking. I think after the Supreme Court struck down the administration's previous tariffs in February, Trump said that he would come back with even stronger tariffs. And at the time, it was kind of hard to imagine like exactly how the administration would go at this. And it was hard to imagine the trade policy or the tariff policy getting any worse. And yet here we are. I find it extremely offensive. And, I understand, again, this is just a tactic to get at the terrorists, but it's sort of appalling.
I think, to your point, Algene, the challenge, lumping both kind of adversaries and friends in the same groups is, we also rely on our friends to compete effectively with China, right? Whether that's for supply chain diversification, export controls, intel sharing, what have you. And so, there's not much difference between 10 and 12.5%. So that they're going to be feeling that. So, whether the benefits of the tariffs outweigh kind of maybe the risk of alienating some friends on some of these other crucial fights, we will find out. I won't say that was the funnest Friday topic.
I'll give one quick fun Friday. They did fund CBP, ICE, and the rest of DHS. So we actually have a fully funded government
Votorama!
For at least 2 months. So, we have officially 2 months worth of funding for a 3-year period for some of the DHS components. So fully funded government.
I did see some friends posts from voting late into the morning or early into the morning, I guess. So I forgot not being on the hill. Algene's face is like, I'm not sure that's a fun.
I mean, ICE can continue to go ahead and deport all those trafficking victims. Go for it.
That was already funded. Now they funded the rest of the government. So at least we have that blocked in.
That is a little DC tidbit, but the things that happen behind the scenes here. But I'm glad, yes, government funding, I guess, crucial for essential services. Okay, folks, thank you for that Fun Friday fact, Matt, keeping us in the loop. That's a wrap. Thanks to Grace Trice, Claude Jennings, and the entire NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us on Monday, June 8th for another episode of Fault Lines, NSI's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. We're on YouTube. So if you want to know what I look like in glasses, check us out there. It's happening today. And if you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.